Welcome to the studio, guys. My name is Disero, and today we're unlocking the secrets of pro-level Reese basses. Now, instead of just showing you my settings, I'm going to show you the systems and principles behind great sounding Reese basses. And once you understand why we do certain things, you'll be able to create these killer basses in any situation. We're going to tackle the biggest issue with Reese basses specifically, that inconsistent weak low end that can ruin your track. And I'll show you a method that gives you both power and movement, but we need to understand the problem first. We're going to cover two popular fixes that actually kill your bass, and trust me, you're going to want to avoid these. By the end, you'll know exactly why these don't work and what to do instead. We're going to use spectrum analyzers, talk about phase, and really understand what's happening in your sound. So without further ado, Jasby, roll that intro. Okay, so let's dive into the DAW here, and I'm going to show you how I construct a basic Reese bass. So let's start with our basic serum patch here. We're just going to take our basic shapes, sawtooth, and we're going to add 16 voices to each. We're going to crank up the detune on both of those oscillators. Now on this sawtooth, we're going to go down one octave, and on this sawtooth, we're going to just keep it at 0. We're going to turn the filter off for a second here. Let's just hear how this bass sounds on its own with no filter. And we're actually going to look at how it's represented on a spectrum analyzer as we go. Now I want to explain what's actually going on this spectrum analyzer for a second so we can understand the science behind this sound. So the purple line is actually our mono signal, and the green line is our antiphase signal, which can kind of be interpreted as our stereo signal. But in reality, the combination of the purple line and the green line make our stereo sound. A good way to think about it is everything that's on the purple line is perfectly in phase between the left and right speaker. So the signal is essentially identical or mono. And everything along the green line is exactly out of phase between the left and right speaker. Meaning that if you were to just sum the green line down to mono, it would completely cancel itself out and disappear. So look at what's happening here. We are getting phase cancellation all the way down to the lowest frequencies. Now before we go and fix this, I'm going to actually do a little bit of a mix on this Reese bass to get it sounding closer to what we actually want it to sound like. So let's start by putting a filter on. We're going to use the MG Low 18, apply it to both oscillators A and B. Let's hear how this sounds. Okay, so it's quite a bit more subdued now. Now we're going to add a compressor, and the reason we want to add a compressor is because, as you can see, when I hit play, because we're dealing with so many different oscillators on the low frequency, some of them are going to end up being in phase and they're going to be louder, and when they cancel, they're going to be a little bit quieter. So we want to even them out a little bit. I'm going to hit play now. See the line here? It's fluctuating quite a bit. That means the compressor is doing exactly what we want with this Reese bass. Now we're going to add in some secret sauce here. This is Melda Spectral Dynamics. And what this is going to do is it's just going to shave off some of the resonance above certain frequency ranges in the low end. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to go in and we want to try to fix our low end so we have mono compatibility and we can get more consistency in our sub. In order to understand what's going on, let's look at our stereo spectrum analyzer. Now specifically look at what's happening in the sub frequencies right here. This line represents the peak hold, but watch the moving line down here. Watch how it fluctuates in level. Now the first thing I'm thinking is, why don't we just pull the width out of the low end and leave the width kind of in the low mids? But it's not that simple. I'm going to show you why. To demonstrate this, I'm going to use a mid-side spectrum analyzer, and I'm going to use a Pro Q with a high-pass filter on the side channel. Now obviously when we pull this to the right, we're going to see the stereo signal get attenuated on the analyzer. As you can see, the side channel is absolutely out of control. Let's pull this EQ over and see what happens. So this looks like what we would want to see, right? The sub is mono and the width goes up into the low mids, but I'm going to show you why there's still a problem. If we go back to our stereo analyzer here and hit play, you're going to see that there's still wild fluctuations in the level in the low end. Watch this. It's still extremely inconsistent, and this is going to really mess up our bass, especially on big sound systems. That's why with a Reese bass specifically, just pulling out the low end in the sides is not sufficient to fix our mono compatibility issues. So now let's try to fix it by splitting the bass out and adding a sub. So we now have two serums here. We have our original sound, and we have a second serum with just a single sawtooth with no unison. Let's play this one by itself. All right, that sounds horrible. Let's turn this into a sub. So we can click this little button here. Now this is our fundamental frequency, and these are all our harmonics in the sound. If we bring up our stereo analyzer and hit play, you can see that's our fundamental, and these are each of our harmonics, exactly as it's represented here on these different bars. So if we were to pull all these bars out, it's going to give us a sort of sine wave. And if we hit play on that and look at the analyzer, we still have these artifacts up here, but it's mostly just our fundamental frequency down here. Now, obviously, this is not ideal. We'd want to just convert this to a sine wave. Now, the reason I showed you this little button right here is because we're going to go back to our original sound. And what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to remove the fundamental, because we know that on our sub, we're basically just keeping this one fundamental down here. So on our main Reese bass sound, we want to remove the fundamental on the mid bass. We're going to do this with both our oscillators. Now, let's see how this is represented on our spectrum analyzer. Here's our sub. We're going to save a picture of that. Now let's play our mid bass. Let's take a picture of this. So as you can see, our sub is down here and our mid bass is up here. Our sub is mono and our mid bass is stereo. Now, unfortunately, this still isn't going to work for us. This kind of technique works with a ton of other basses, but it doesn't quite work with Reese basses. I'm going to show you why here. If we play both of these at the same time, look what happens. You can see that there's lots of level fluctuations up here on the harmonics, but there's absolutely no level fluctuations here in the sub. And what this does is it makes the sound disjointed between the sub and the harmonics. The harmonics are flowy and wide, and the sub is static and solid, but it still has absolutely no movement. Now, this can work great on something like a drop, where you really need that steady, solid sub that doesn't fluctuate at all. But on something like a Reese bass, you really want to have a little bit of movement in the low end, but you want to have some consistency at the same time. So now I'm going to show you exactly how to fix this. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to go back to our two main sounds. We're going to change them all back to saw waves. So we have one saw wave in mono, and we have our main Reese bass in stereo with 16 unison on each of these oscillators. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to bus these separately. So we're going to take our sub right here. We're going to take our main sound right here, and we're going to send them to their own two buses right here. So this channel is our sub bass, and this channel is our mid bass. Now on our sub bass, we're going to cut everything above 90 hertz. And we're going to do it on a 24 dB per octave low pass. Now on our mid bass, we're actually going to do the opposite. We're going to go to 90 hertz, and we're going to do a 24 dB per octave high pass. So we're essentially creating a crossover point. So now we're going to look at the mid-side analyzer, and let's see what's happening in the sound now. So what we see is it's still very stereo in the low mids where we crossed it over, but in the sub, it's not all mono. There's still a little bit of stereo mixed in, and that's because of the crossover that we set. So now let's check if this has actually fixed our problem with level fluctuations in the low end. Have a look at the sub and let's see if it's still fluctuating. So I'm sure you could see what was happening there. The sub wasn't just pinned, it was moving slightly, but it wasn't fluctuating a ton. It wasn't moving around. So what we're going to hear is there's still a little bit of width in the low end, just enough to still keep that wavy vibe in the sub, but it's not so wide that it's messing up our stereo imaging. Now we can have full control over this just by moving the crossover point. So if we want a more mono sub, we can move our crossover to the right. And if we want a more stereo sub, we can move our crossover to the left. Now let's listen to this little passage we made in context and see how the bass fits in the mix. Well, there you have it, guys. That's how you create a Reese bass that is still flowy and wide, but it has some level of consistency in the low end. It's going to sound great on both headphones and on big club speakers, and that sub isn't just going to disappear on you because of phase cancellation issues. Now, we actually turned all of these analyzer settings into span presets, and if you want to get your hands on them, just head over to our Instagram, the link is in the description, and send us the word preset in the DMs, and we'll be happy to send those over to you. And of course, if you guys like our style, feel free to like and subscribe, and hit that bell notification so you can get notified when new videos come out. All right, that about wraps it up, so I will see you guys in the next video.